On Saturday, over 100,000 people attended a demo organised by far-right agitator Tommy Robinson. From the stage, people called for the banning of all religious expression in Britain except for Christians. They called for the so-called remigration or mass expulsion of anyone with an immigrant background. And Elon Musk, the world's richest man, told attendees they need to fight or be killed, essentially a call for civil war. Now, this should all be fairly easy for a centre-left government to oppose, but the Labour Party struggled.
Peter Carl, there were 150,000 people on a demonstration in London yesterday, organised by Tommy Robinson, who's just recently left jail. Does that disturb you?
It doesn't disturb me because it's actually proof that we live in a country where free speech, free association is alive and well. The bit that disturbs me is that when a minority go to an extreme and end up perpetrating violence against the police, that is unacceptable, and those people should and will pay a price for it.
Now, that is a really, really pathetic response, I think. So we showed you some of the clips of people speaking at that demonstration, right? There were people calling for remigration, so deporting anyone who's not white. People might give you sort of slightly different definitions of it, but the idea is it's not about whether you're a citizen or a legal immigrant. They want to deport citizens. Or expel citizens, I suppose, because you can't really deport a citizen. People saying no religion should be allowed to be practiced other than Christianity. Like, the Labour are worried about offending people. Now, how many people? These are issues where there is a super majority of people that think these are crazy, horrible, horrific ideas, and all he can say is, "Oh well, I think the scuffles with the police were bad," right? Do you not have anything politically to say about what kind of politics these people, knowingly or not, maybe lots of them are just sort of ordinary people who feel patriotic, who feel a bit sort of disenchanted from the establishment. But by turning up to that and listening to those speeches, right, if they didn't know that that's what was being said on the stage, maybe it'd be useful for Peter Carl to show some political leadership and point out the actual nature of that demonstration, instead of just saying, oh, it's good that people have freedom of speech and as long as they don't commit crimes. Like, you're a politician. You should be able to speak politically. You're not like a civil servant. If you're a civil servant, you're supposed to just, or the chief of the police, for example, you're supposed to just talk about what's legal and what's illegal. If you're a politician, you're allowed to say, this message was racist and therefore we're against it. I imagine there was some kind of pressure on Keir Starmer because, so many people saw this demonstration and thought it was very scary and that the response from the party had been completely pathetic. So there was a slight upgrade in the message. So at 2 p.m., Keir Starmer tweeted, "People have a right to peaceful protest. It is core to our country's values, but we will not stand for assaults on police officers doing their job or for people feeling intimidated on our streets because of their background or the colour of their skin. Britain is a nation proudly built on tolerance, diversity and respect. Our flag represents our diverse country, and we will never surrender it to those that use it as a symbol of violence, fear and division." So finally, some anti-racism introduced, although again, only in tweet form. Keir Starmer has had more than a year now to sort of point out that this is actually a political issue and racism is bad. I'm joined by journalist and broadcaster Sangita Myska to discuss the politics of this. But I'll begin actually, Sangita, by asking you about the counter-demonstration, because you were on it. What was your day like on Saturday?
Thank you for having me on, first of all, Michael. Thanks for the invitation. It's good to be here. It's interesting, actually. I had just come back from a trip to the occupied West Bank, where I was on a fact-finding mission. And all the time that I was there, I was seeing firsthand what it means for Palestinians to live under an extreme far-right government that wants an ethno-nationalist state. I arrived back on the Thursday, and on the Friday morning, I discovered that Tommy Robinson, Stephen Yaxley Lennon, who is a literal far-right activist whose ideology is entirely based on racism at its core, is attempting to rally people in central London. So the first thing I did was ask around with friends, worked out that Stand Up to Racism was going to be holding a counter demonstration. And I'd already heard in the background that there was now going to be a women's block. And I think this was a really important step forward, because what we know about women and peace movements particularly is that women have very often been at the forefront of that. So I decided to turn up at the counter demonstration and walked with that block of women. And it's important to describe who was there. The vast majority of the people there were white women. And when I started talking to the women there as to why they had arrived, they said, look, what we want to do is counter what Robinson has done very effectively, which is weaponize the narrative that he and his goons are here to protect us, to protect white women from non-white men, and principally men that are coming over in small boats as asylum seekers. So that was kind of the block that I was walking with. Everything was fine. We walked along from Russell Square down through the Strand. We then eventually turn up past Trafalgar Square and end up in Whitehall, which is where the designated end point was to hear a few speeches. When we got there, I decided to walk up to the furthest barrier that I could get to, which, had I been able to carry on walking, would have eventually led me to Parliament Square. I couldn't do that because the police had created what they called a sterile zone. And that's what the Metropolitan Police and other police forces will do in order to keep opposing sides of demonstrators apart. What happened was that it appears to me that the police were completely taken aback by the large number of Tommy Robinson supporters that were there. And some of them ended up spilling over into a side street called Whitehall Place. So essentially, they were more or less in spitting distance of where we were. There were a row of police vans, and at one point, so this was about 2:40 to 2:45 in the afternoon, violence started erupting. So people who are, these are Robinson supporters, who are on Whitehall Place, started pelting police officers, and they were trying to break through the barriers. The police went to their police vans, they took out their riot gear, riot shields, batons, headgear, and they started pushing them back. So this is now quite early on in the afternoon. I hung around chatting to other people who are counter-demonstrators. We heard a couple of speeches. And then by about 4:30-ish, I think, we decided to sort of make our way out of Whitehall on the way home. I asked one of the stewards how we could do that, and he said, just walk straight back up towards Trafalgar Square. As we did that, we noticed there were very thin lines of police who were essentially acting as a wall, but a very thin wall, between the counter-demonstrators and the odd Tommy Robinson supporter who had begun to filter through from Trafalgar Square down into Whitehall. So we continued to walk up and noticed larger and larger numbers of people who were wrapped in flags, many of whom looked completely off their heads, started running down through the gaps in the police lines, all the way down towards the counter-demonstrators. As we walked up, we arrive at Trafalgar Square to see literally a sea of people who are covered in George crosses, who are jeering and shouting. And very quickly, it was obvious that the police were scrambling to try and find a way to build a cordon or re-establish a cordon between the counter-demonstrators and Tommy Robinson's supporters. We're not talking about half a dozen people on the fringe of the Tommy Robinson demonstration. We're now talking about hundreds and hundreds of people filtering down from the Strand and flooding Trafalgar Square. So I managed to do a bit of filming, which I then put on my social media stuff. And you can see police scrambling to try and find a way of re-establishing order. After about three minutes after I finished filming, because I realized we had to just get out of there, and it was chaotic, Michael. It was absolutely chaotic by this stage. I realized that police mounted on horses had managed to make their way to the top of Whitehall to try and fight back what were a bunch of racists from trying to get to the counter-demonstrators. The suggestion that this was, by Peter Kyle, that this was simply a bunch of anodyne free speech activists who are coming over to have a cup of tea and a chat with people who were significantly smaller in number at this counter-demonstration is utterly, utterly ridiculous. The only reason they had decided to make their way down to see the counter-demonstrations would logically be to try and attack them.
I suppose I'm wondering where we go from here, because it's been the standard sort of tactic of the left when there is a far-right demonstration to organise a counter-demonstration. And normally, I've been on some in the past, and normally the assumption is that there'll be more of you. Normally the idea is the far-right might be sort of aggressive and they might have this sort of strange militant organisation, but it's the left or the anti-racists who will be sort of larger in number. And that gives you a sort of security and confidence because you feel like, well, they might be violent and scary, but as long as we stay together, we will be bigger than them. When I sort of heard there's 150,000 people, and I would say at least like some of those aerial sort of films, and then 5,000 anti-racist protesters, that sounded terrifying to me. And I suppose, what do we do a change of, because it's a difficult ask, isn't it? If Tommy Robinson organises another demonstration of this many people, do we say, well, we'll get more than 150,000? Because otherwise you're sort of inviting people to go to quite a dangerous situation. I suppose I'm a bit at a loss to work out what to do. Maybe the anti-racists should have a protest on a different day. What do you think, sort of having attended that protest on Saturday?
So I think the police had a very difficult job on their hands. There were 4 home games. They had managed to recruit, I think, about 500 police officers from other forces to try and backfill what was going to be an already overstretched Metropolitan Police. I think the police have a lot to learn from last weekend. It started out fine, and for the majority of the day, we were kept well apart. I think what was very clear is that, as you say, nobody was expecting between 100,000 and potentially 150,000. I don't know whether that higher figure is entirely accurate. Pro-Tommy Robinson demonstrators to turn up. And I think the police were overwhelmed and they didn't have particularly good intelligence, and they should have thought more about protecting essentially what was our flank. I have very mixed feelings about this. I think the reason I turned up is because I'm old enough to remember, as a child, the late 1970s, the 80s and into the 90s. So that was the period where we had the National Front, we had the BNP, we had the EDL, we had eventually Combat 18, which were a very nasty bunch of violent racists. And I realised from looking back at that time, that it's really, really important that we make sure that when the television cameras are rolling, we are able in large numbers to demonstrate that Tommy Robinson and his crew are a large but vociferous minority. I do not think that they represent the great British public. What we know about the people that turned up to Robinson's event is this: not every single one of them would have been a racist, but every single racist in the country is very likely to have attempted to turn up to Tommy Robinson's rally on Saturday. So I think it's really important that we don't sleepwalk our way into allowing the far right to get the upper hand in the narrative. And the narrative that they're currently pushing is, 1, they represent the working class of Great Britain, which they don't. Number 2, that they care about violence against women and girls. If they did, Michael, they would be kicking up a massive fuss about the fact that 2 women are killed every single week by their partners. You will not find Tommy Robinson ever mentioning that anywhere. Neither will you find him showing his outrage at what is currently under investigation by West Midlands Police, which is a racially aggravated rape against a Sikh Indian woman. There has been complete silence on this matter. Absolutely no one in their right minds thinks that the grooming gangs who raped and trafficked young girls for far too many years was a good thing. But what we do know about that situation was that there was a fundamental breakdown between social services, the police, and people who were trying to raise the alarm. We all know that was bad. We are all united in that. Robinson, the third narrative he's managed to very successfully weaponize, as we know, is that asylum seekers coming across in small boats, these people account for 4% of overall migration into the country. That 4% is responsible for 99% of the deeply entrenched structural long-term problems we have in this country, like a struggling NHS, a lack of housing, a lack of resources and school places for parents who want to get their kids into good schools. We've got to be able to turn the tide, Michael. And part of that is going to have to be us coming out in greater numbers, saying this is not Robinson's version of what Britain is not accurate and it is not representative. To answer your question about having a rally on a separate day, it's interesting you mentioned this. In the last 24 hours, I've been contacted by a range of people, including some groups who are saying, actually, perhaps we do need to come out and have a counter demonstration, not on a day where or just a demonstration, not on a day where Tommy Robinson is creating a rally, in order that we can put forward our vision of a more united Britain, which is patently aware that we have deep structural problems, not least an economy that is failing to grow at the moment, but that actually we believe that our success is built on diversity and unity, and principally democracy.
I mean, how big a problem do you think it's a loaded question, isn't it? But just the lack of political leadership essentially on this question, where Keir Starmer has been completely unwilling, other than, one tweet yesterday, sort of after 24 hours, but he's had a year. He's very unwilling to call anything racist and talk about how we should stand against ethno-nationalism, for example. Do you think that that's causing a real problem in terms of sort of mobilizing against this? Because it just seems like, okay, the moment now is for the far right. The best thing for everyone else to do is just to sort of stand back and wait until the momentum comes back to the left. I feel like there is something of that in the air at the moment. And I think that is because there's a vacuum of leadership. But I want to hear your opinions on that.
I completely agree with you. There is a vacuum of leadership. I'm really confused by Keir Starmer's reticence. It's an interesting thing because I don't think Keir Starmer is somebody who has particularly well thought out political principles. But one would hope that somebody who was formerly the director of public prosecutions in this country would understand very clearly what criminality is. What we know is that Tommy Robinson is, in fact, a convicted criminal. We also know that what we were hearing from Elon Musk was, in my view at least, incitement to violence. He was literally saying you need the dissolution of parliament and that war is coming to you. If anything, I would think, were the kind of words that should send shock through Keir Starmer's spine. So it's really weird that he issued essentially what seems to be a tweet in which he says, well, it's all kind of free speech, but don't worry about it because, we are going to deal with the people that attack the police officers, but we're going to let everything else go. I don't really understand what he's doing here. If I'm feeling very generous about it, it might be that he was distracted by the fact that he had appointed Mandelson to become ambassador to Washington. And that, of course, has all ended in tears as we realized that he had befriended a prolific paedophile. I think there may be something else going on as well, which is that, I don't know if you remember this, the Shawcross Review, I think it was 2023 or 2024, was instituted to try and have a look at how effective the government's PREVENT scheme was. So this was the de-radicalization program. The government has ploughed lots and lots and lots of money into. Successive administrations have done that. And what William Shawcross concludes in that review is that actually, in his opinion, there has been far too much concentration on the rise of the far right. Now, I'm very much hoping that William Shawcross is today eating his words, because I think the result of his conclusion was that government spending reduced and actually PREVENT started looking away from what we knew was a rapidly rising number of young men who are being attracted to the far right. They take their eye off the ball, and as a result, the government stops being particularly interested in it. What we saw on Saturday was the culmination, I would argue, probably of that. Richard Bergen said it best, the Labour MP said it best, I think, this morning, when he said, and I'm paraphrasing here, if we end up at the next general election with what looks like and sounds like a far-right government, all the other problems we have in this country, like a crumbling NHS, like a lack of housing, is literally going to fall by the wayside. We need to get a handle on this. Ed Davies' idea of having a range of political leaders come out and condemn what is happening is a really important gesture. I think it would draw a line in the sand. It would say Tommy Robinson is operating well outside the sphere of reasonable political debate. At the core of Robinson's philosophy is race theory. These people literally believe that white people in this country are being replaced and that there's some great plan to do it by ethnic minorities and principally brown and black people. You said it yourself. It was a brilliant summary by you. They believe in re-immigration. They believe in banning all religions except Christianity. This is a relatively new thing and an idea that's essentially come across from American evangelical churches. As we've been discussing, we hear Elon Musk essentially talking about overthrowing democracy. How much more is it going to take before this Labour government understands that this is not an issue they can stick on the back burner? This is an urgent matter, and it cannot be left just to civil society. I don't know if you saw this tweet from Brendan Cox today. His wife, of course, the MP Jo Cox, Labour MP, who was murdered by a man who shouted "Britain First," which is a right-wing, an extremist right-wing organisation, just before he killed her, saying, if you have ideas, if you want to create a movement that's going to counter the narrative from Tommy Robinson, contact me. It should not be left to the widow of Jo Cox to be thinking about how to strategize to try and reclaim the narrative, Michael. Something is going very, very wrong if it's only left to civil society. This needs to be a non-partisan government response. We have to understand this is not about politics. This is about human rights and stopping the rise of fascism and extremism in the UK.